But right now, while we're waiting for the rest of our friends to log on.
All right. All right,
Well,
friends. Mr. Mahoney, I'm just
morning.
going to let you take it away.
Okay, good morning. Those of you who are fortunate enough to have windows can see what a gorgeous sunny day it is. Last minute, I decided to put this canopy up so that I was not standing in the hot sun. I keep bees as a hobby, and I've done so now for, I think, 5 years. This will be my 5th year, and I do it in my backyard. My bees live in hives that are different from the hives that you would expect to see. Many of you have seen white boxes that stack up. They either sit on low platforms or right on the ground, and the bees are flying in and out of those boxes. Those are the kinds of beehives that beekeepers who are trying to produce honey to sell use. They use that kind of beehive because the section on the top can be removed, and the bees let the farmer or the beekeeper take the honey away and put back an empty box where the bees then fill it up with honey again. My beehives are not built that way. They're built after a model beehive that comes from Africa, from Kenya specifically. They're designed in Kenya to serve a multiple purpose. And one of the purposes that they serve is as an elephant deterrent. The farmers set up beehives like this, hanging on cables that surround their crops as a fence. And if the elephants bang into the cable, the bees come out and they buzz around the elephant's ears, which annoys the elephant. I don't think that bees can actually sting and hurt an elephant, but they do get annoyed, so they leave the crops that are inside the fence alone. I use this kind of hive because it's interesting, and that's the extent of my explanation. Before looking at the hives, however, I want to show you some of the tools that beekeepers use. And to do that, I think I'm going to turn my camera around and show you the primary tool that a beekeeper uses is a thing called a smoker. And this is a metal can that has a fire inside, and you can see smoke is puffing out when I squeeze a bellows. Smoke puffs out. Beekeepers use this smoke to calm the bees down. Some people will tell you that the bees think that the house is on fire and they huddle to protect everything. Mostly what it does is it calms the bees because the bees communicate with one another, not by sound, but by scent. They give off a very faint scent that other bees can understand. Scent is a smell. And the bees then are unable to communicate because the smoke masks the scents. The other major tool that a beekeeper uses is this veil. Hard to see. This is a hat that fits over my head and is covered with a screen. Let me push it back further. And it protects me from bees flying into my face. And it's interesting, what I've learned is that this type of beehive, the bees are very relaxed, and I have stopped using the veil, except when I'm putting brand new bees in that have not adapted to the particular hive. And also, the beekeeper wears gloves. And these gloves look like normal gloves, but they extend almost to my elbow. And again, this is to protect me from being stung. The gloves are leather, the palms are leather here, and the sleeves are canvas. But I've found that my bees don't want to sting me. When a bee stings a person, the bee actually ends up dying because the stinger gets left in whomever they sting, and then their body, it's as if they are missing a major part of their body. The yellow brush is a very, very soft brush, and it's used to brush the bees away without injuring them. And finally, this tool, which if you do painting around your house, or if you help with the painting around your house, you may have seen it's a stiff metal scraper, prier, and I use it to open spaces in the hive by sticking it in and twisting it. It's very rigid. I do have rubber gloves that I wear because the honey is very sticky and I would rather not have it sticking to my fingers. Here is a jar of honey that was harvested last year. And you can see that as I've taken honey out of the jar, there's some crystals formed. These are sugar crystals in the honey. But if I'm going to hold the honey up to the light, you can see through it. It's got a nice amber color. This is a dark honey. Oftentimes in the store, you get very light honey. The light honey comes from like clover flowers that are small white flowers. And in my beehive, the bees build this structure. This is what they built inside the beehive. This is from last year, and it is empty now. But up at the top, you see there are light cells, and they had stored honey in those. And at the rest of the honeycomb is dark, and in those dark spaces, the bees raised their young. They raise their young because the queen lays an egg in the cell, and the worker bees then take care of the egg. Eventually they cover the egg as it turns into a larva and eventually emerges. I'm going to try to zoom in. You see these yellow, the solid yellow cells? Those are pollen, and the bees collect the pollen to feed the young larvae. What I'm going to do now is take the camera up to the hive where you normally wouldn't go and get real close to the entrance where you'll see the bees are going in and out. They have a screen that appears to cover the entrance, but what it serves as a landing area so that bees can fly in, land on the screen. There are holes in the wood behind the screen that you cannot see. But I want you to notice something. That there's a bee walking around that looks like it has yellow, that she looks like she has yellow on her legs. Does anyone know what that bee is carrying on her legs? And again, you stick answers into the chat, and I hope that it appears on my screen. Esther, maybe, oh, nope, that's right, pollen. And what the bees have been doing is visiting flowers. And when they go to the flower, they collect pollen and nectar. The pollen, they actually pick up with one of their legs and pack it into little pill shapes on their hind legs. Bees have 6 legs. They're true insects. And here's a flower. It's not blooming yet. You can't see any bees on it, but this is a milkweed flower. These bees love the milkweed and they share it with butterflies. Now what I'm going to do is go up and actually open the hive and we'll look inside. If they sting me, I will not scream. I'll ignore the sting so that they don't think they're getting away with anything. You're seeing now the top of the hive. It's a hinged box, and inside the hive, we can see bees standing around, pretty much doing, what they're actually doing is maintenance tasks. Doesn't look like much, but they've been inside the honeycomb. They've been cleaning it up, and they come to the top here where they will eventually take things and throw them away. It's not often that you get to see it, but I have on occasion seen the bees removing moths. There's a kind of moth that the bees don't like to have in their hive, and they will remove that moth. I need to step away from the camera for a moment, but you keep an eye on what's going on. I'll be right back.
I just want to see a show of hands. Who has learned something they didn't know already?
Thank you. I had to get my tools.
Mr. Mahoney,
Yes.
I don't know if you can see, but there's a lot of people raising their hands. I asked them who has already learned something that they had never known before.
Oh,
And everyone's got their hand up. You are teaching us so many cool things right now.
well, in the true spirit of being a teacher, I learned these things yesterday. Oh, actually, I'll tell you, if you're interested in bees and learning more about bees, it is not a very difficult hobby. You just need a place to set up a hive. And it's something that an adult would want to decide to do back in December, because it takes a while to get things set up, to order bees, and to get your beehive started. You'll see on these white strips of wood, there are numbers. That's my way of keeping track of what's going on inside the hive. I write on the strip of wood what I have seen in the hive. So I'm going to begin to open the hive. Whoops. I don't know if you saw that, but that was an abrupt opening. So let me get more smoke for them. I'm just stepping aside. I'm going to try changing microphones so that you might hear the noise they make. I'm now using the iPad microphone, and they do make a humming noise. Whoops. So in the hive, along here is a board that separates the inside of their space with a feeder. And this feeder, when there are no flowers out, I will put honey water, sugar water in, and the bees can go in through this opening down and pick up the sugar water as if it was the nectar on the hive, on the flowers. I'm going to remove this here. And open one of these bars. I added this bar the beginning of, 2 weeks ago. When I added this, it had all the wax, all the comb in it, but there was nothing in the comb. And what you're seeing is hundreds, maybe half a thousand bees who are busy doing things in this comb. The first thing that they need to do in the comb is clean it, because it's comb, sorry about that. It's comb from last year, and it may have had things in it that this year's bees don't want. The comb is two-sided. The bees can get to the wax from either side. I don't know if you can see the shape there. There's honeycomb on either side of a very thin line. And they do this to make use of the space in a very efficient manner. Bees are very good at conserving their energy, and every bee has a job to do. The bees who you see on this first comb that I had put in, that I took out, are young worker bees whose only job is to clean the hive. So somebody came off mute, so they're echoing my voice. What you should see here what we have here is honeycomb that has, you notice that behind the bees, there's covered cells. And those covered cells have in them young larval bees. It's difficult for me to see what you see, but this is an example of the covered cell. Inside that cell, now that it's covered, an egg has changed into a larva, and that larva is maturing to become an adult bee. One of the things that I look for as a beekeeper is to make sure that I see those cells, and I don't know if I can make the bees show me. If you look, if you can see inside this cell where my finger is pointing, just above my finger, get away from there, lady. You might be able to see what looks like a small white worm. And that's the larva of the bee. The other thing on this bar, and each of these pieces of wood is called a bar, the bees have started to store honey And this honey that you see in sort of the lumpy cells is for the newly emerged bees. When they do hatch, they're going to need something to eat, so they can go very quickly to find honey. Now, this bar says to me that the last time I looked, I saw the queen in here. And that would be kind of neat to see. The queen has a painted spot on her back, which the people who sold me the bees, they do this so that it's easy to see the queen. And I do not see the queen on here. That would be fun to see. Get out of there. Here again is a bar with honey at the top with brood cells. The cells that are covered are called brood cells. And I don't know if you can see a difference. These cells are small, flat coverings. These cells are bigger coverings. These cells have the male bee, called a drone, and the other cells, the smaller covering cells, are the female or the worker bee cells. Interestingly, all the work in the hive is done by the worker bees. The drones are present only to help fertilize the queen when it comes time to do so, which is usually like at the end of February when the queen emerges and needs to start laying. She gets fertilized by a drone, but there are hundreds of drones in the colony to sitting around waiting. One of the things that I promise the bees is that I will not disturb them more than I need to. So I'm going to start closing up the hive, and then I'll go back to where there's shade and see if I can answer any questions that you may have. Just one last thing. When I bought this collection of bees, the queen came inside this box, and she was protected from escape. And the queen is held in the box by a little plug here. There's nothing there now. The plug is made out of sugar. And when I put the box into the hive and I hung it like this, the worker bees began chewing on the sugar to let the queen out. It takes them about a half a day to do that. And once they do that, what they have done is learned who their queen is by her scent, the smell that she gives off. The technical term is pheromones. I don't know if you want to add that to a spelling list, but don't ask my help spelling it. The bees arrived in this box. This box was delivered to me one year. It actually came to the post office, and the postman was a little worried about the bees and had it wrapped up in window screens to protect him. I tried to assure him that the bees are not going to bother. Actually, when the bees are in the box, they're very docile, they're very gentle, because their major concern at that point is getting to know their queen. And it is not until they have a hive full of larvae that they begin to get defensive about the hive. And the bees will, you notice that they didn't sting me. I have a deal with them. I will not hurt them, and they will not hurt me. I've had bees land on me, and it's really cute, but you hold still and you not do anything abrupt. If I were to start to squash a bee, it would become upset and would turn around and sting me. So I'm careful not to squash them. Even, you may have seen, as I put these bars back in, I was gentle about getting the bees out of the way. And I'll cover the hive carefully. So that's the inside of the hive. Let me go back to my nice shade. Change cameras. Come on. Okay, here I am again. So, and now that I'm looking at the screen and not the bees, I can begin to take questions that might be asked. Oh, and now I see Esther, who's on mute.
Okay. So we've, Mr. Mahony, that was incredible. Wow. How cool was that? Thumbs up? Yeah. Who's ever been that close to a beehive in real time? And getting to see all the insides, and oh, so cool. My goodness. So we've had hands up the entire time, and there are some really, really great questions coming your way. So let's see. I know Matt, so my first four hands, oh, actually five of them. So we'll start with Leland. Leland, honey, you want to ask your question? Where'd he go?
The Leland was on mute still.
Okay. All right. It's not, okay, so Silas, did you have a question, hon?
I actually want to say that I've been very close to these before.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Thank you for sharing. Now we're doing questions right now. So Maximus, what's your question?
My question is, how long did it take for to get all the bee supplies and also the bees?
That's a good question. It took planning, and it was in December that I made the decision to get bees in April. So I needed to plan 4 and 5 months ahead of time. Much of the equipment that I got, you like so many other things that you buy these days, you go on the internet and you order it, and it would take a week to get here. The bees themselves were born in North Carolina, I believe, and there are big bee farms there. They collect the bees and put them in that box that I showed you, and put them on a truck, and a whole truckload of those boxes arrived in Hampton, Connecticut, and the man who ordered them for us then sent me an email, and I went and I picked up my boxes of bees. I brought them home and very unceremoniously dumped them into the hive, closed the hive, and said, okay, ladies, you relax, get used to your new home. And I did not open the hive for another week, just so that they would be made comfortable.
Wow. Thank you. Thanks for asking, Maximus. Carly, you had your hand up before, honey.
I have two questions. One, how do you know who the queen bee is?
Well, the queen bee is the biggest bee, and she has a long body, where all the other bees have a short body, where the body consists of a head, thank you, I'm missing that, a thorax, and their abdomen. The queen bee's abdomen is twice the size of any other bees. The drones are larger in all directions. They're maybe half again as big as the worker bees. But like I said, they're not doing anything. They're just there in case. What was your second question, Carly?
And is there or will there ever be a king bee, or will it only be a queen bee?
Good question. Bees are not constrained by social mores. No, the biology of bees, the biology of most organisms is that the female is responsible for reproduction. The whole existence of the beehive is, in terms of evolution, and this may be going beyond what you're expecting, but in terms of the natural world, all species have as their primary goal to survive. And in order to survive, there needs to be a queen laying eggs, and there need to be workers who nurture those eggs into adults who then help the queen with new eggs. And the whole goal of the beehive is also referred to as a colony. The whole goal of the colony is to have enough bees and enough honey to survive the winter, so that comes next spring, when the bees leave the hive again to go look for flowers, that there will be enough of them.
Wow, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And those were great questions, Carly. Ms. Beauregard's class, there's a hello.
So our question is, how long does it take for an egg to hatch, I guess is the best word. So how long does it take from being laid to coming out as either a worker or a drone?
A worker bee will emerge in about 21 days. There's a slight variance based on temperature. And I didn't mention, one of the tools that I keep, now I can't find it, is a thermometer. And I can stick this thermometer in between the bars and determine that the bees are keeping, did I lose everybody?
No, we got you.
Okay. And determine that the bees are keeping the hive warm enough. they actually like to keep the hive about 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is easy this week. It is not easy in the winter. In the winter, what happens is the bees actually form a cluster that looks like a large grapefruit. And their sole responsibility is to eat honey and use that energy to keep the queen warm enough throughout the winter.
Thank you. Mrs. Hurst's class? Okay. No? All right. Gab, you have a question, hon?
How come the bees are black and yellow?
Thank you.
I never asked. Every organism in nature looks slightly different. There are bees in my yard that are not black and yellow. They're brown and yellow. They're brown and orange. There are bumblebees that are black and yellow. So I would say that the coloring is one way that they are identified in nature. I don't think that they do it for camouflage because they do not have natural predators. If you think about it, the predator might be a bird who would fly up and bite a bee. Well, they'll only do that once. So it may be worth finding out what the purpose of the coloring is. So thanks for asking.
Great question. Thank you. All right, Silas, I see a hand up.
He took his hands down. I think he didn't
Okay.
realize his hand
All
was-
right. Mrs. Sullivan's classroom.
All right, go ahead. We get feedback here, sorry. Okay, go ahead, Julian.
How long did it take the bees to get new to the queen bee? And also, how old is the queen bee?
Well, so I'll answer your second question. My queen bee is probably 4 months old. And she was born at the end of last winter. And it takes the worker bees who are just meeting the queen on the line of 4 or 5 days to learn about the new queen. And once they do, they are committed to her. Now, when the new bees are hatched, they learn about the new queen because of her scent, because of the scent inside the hive almost immediately.
All right. Mrs. LaRose's class.
On mute.
All right, sorry. So Mrs. Hurst stopped by because she doesn't have any sound. Can I give you her question first?
Sure.
Okay, so Mrs. Hurst's class wants to know how much work is it to extract the honey?
Well, that's going to be difficult for me to answer because I don't take their honey from them. The honey that I have was left behind when bees abandoned the hive. In that case, what I do is I take the honeycomb, I put it in a metal colander, just like you have in your kitchen, and I crush the hive, the comb, and let the honey drip out. A commercial beekeeper will use a machine called an extractor they will take the honeycomb that's in those white boxes that you see. They're in a wooden frame. They can put the frame into the extractor and spin the extractor, and the honey gets removed very quickly. Within an hour, all the comb is empty of honey. The honey has drained down the side of the inside of the extractor, and the beekeeper can then strain it to remove any extra pieces of wax that may have come off.
Thank you. Barry, you've had your hand up forever.
Did you say Mary, Miss Esther?
I said Barry.
Okay.
Where did Barry go?
All right. So when you remember, put your hand back up and we'll call on you, okay? And actually, there was another question, right? Ms. LaRose, you had your own question.
Yep, we do. So my class had a question. How do you get the bees in the first place?
You write out a check. There are two ways to get bees. One way is to purchase them from somebody who is in the business of raising bees to sell. Those farmers, those beekeepers are generally in the South, where the bee season begins much sooner than up here in New England. The other way to get bees is to try and trap them. And I have an example of a trap that I set up. And the trap is merely a box that sits in a tree. You can see it behind me here, this white box with an opening. And inside that box, I put a scent that is similar to the queen scent. But no bees have come in here. What happens is when bees feel that their hive is getting too crowded, the queen will actually take half the bees and leave. And they will go look for a new place, a hole in a tree, under somebody's porch, or a box like mine.
Very cool.
Miss Esther,
Yes.
we had a question that came up earlier in the chat. One of the students asked if honey is actually bee vomit. So Mr. Mahony, can you describe what exactly honey is to our students?
Okay, you're second graders, correct?
Second and third.
Second and third.
All right, so, well, then I can talk advanced biology.
Excellent.
For the third graders. What the bees do is that they pick up pollen, which they use much in the same way that we use bread. Pollen is a starch and it's a protein. The other thing that bees pick up is nectar, which is the sweet, tiny drop of sweetness inside a flower. In evolutionary terms, the flower has secreted this nectar in order to attract the bees to jiggle the pollen around and share their pollen from flower to flower. But the bees bring the pollen and the nectar back to the hive. When the bees collect the nectar, they take it in through, for the lack of a better word, their mouth. And they hold it until they get into the hive. Their body mixes the nectar with an enzyme, which then causes the nectar to not ferment. Then they put one of these little drops of nectar into an empty cell, and other bees are doing the same thing until they have filled that cell up. Eventually, the bees test this nectar-filled cell until it has begun to dry out, become thicker. You know how if you leave leave something to dry. As the water evaporates, the liquid becomes thick and sticky. And that's what happens. So in one sense, yes, the bee is spitting back the nectar that she collected, but it is not vomit the way we think of vomit from ourselves, our little brothers, or our cat.
Excellent. Also, remember how when we learned about third graders, when we learned about owl pellets, right? We learned that those, they're not throwing up, right? They're ejecting something, right? Because they're not sick when this is happening, so it's not throwing up. And the bees are not sick. That's the way that their bodies work, right, Mr. Mahoney?
Yes, yes.
Right.
Their bodies do process the nectar before they deposit the nectar back inside of an empty cell.
Okay. Barry, you remember your question? Okay, go.
How do you know when the bees trust you? Like that you're not
It was very hard to understand you, Barry.
How do you know that the bees trust you and that they won't sting you?
Oh, well, that's easy. They don't sting me, and I figure that's because they trust me. But what I will quickly tell anybody who is interested in bees is the bees teach you to behave in a very calm manner. So whenever I open the beehive, I convince myself and my body to just relax. If I'm relaxed, scents that my body gives off, smells that my body gives off, say to the bees, I'm relaxed. And you know that people tell you that dogs can sense it when you're afraid. And again, it's the same communication between me and the bees that is like between you and a dog. If you are afraid of a dog senses that and can react. If I were afraid of the bees would sense that, and it may make them angry, and it may make them defensive, and so they might sting.
Wow. You're so good at answering these questions with depth. It's wonderful. Thank you. Miss Stephanie, are there other questions in the chat that our friends have put out?
So the two main questions that came through in the chat had to do with bee vomit and the color, the black and yellow that we're familiar with. So we spoke about those two things. Someone shared that their dad is a beekeeper, so he or she's been able to see this up close. But then we have turned off the chat since students were getting distracted when Mr. Mahoney was sharing the beehive. So since then, we haven't had questions because the chat's been off.
That's right. I forgot that I had to do that. Thank you.
Oh,
All right.
well, I think it's cool that you have one of your students with a beehive.
Yeah.
The whole country can use more beehives because we need to protect bees. Bees are not surviving today in 2020 to the present the way they were even 10 years ago. So fewer bees are born next spring each year. And what is helpful is to bring more bees into cultivation in beehives in backyards. Even if you don't get a lot of honey, it's a fun hobby. It teaches you patience. And if someone in your household is good with tools, they can build the boxes that the bees live in. Otherwise, you buy them and it starts costing you hundreds of dollars, something that I did not want to do personally.
Mr. Mahoney, I wanted to, so Mr. Mahoney and I had a brief conversation earlier this morning before we got onto the Zoom call. And he asked if we had managed to give honey sticks to our students. And I said, no, because I was distracted. And then I realized that we did give honey sticks to all our students.
Miss
And I think-
Esther, was it just, I'm trying to remember if it was second and third grade that we dropped honey sticks off to, or just one of those two grades?
Second graders, anybody have honey sticks?
I see Miss Sakadovich's class
And Miss
does.
Brown's class does. Okay, so everybody should have honey sticks. Cool.
There
Excellent.
are heads shaking.
Yeah, some folks
No.
are saying that they don't have them.
Okay, well, they might be at home, I think.
Yeah, it's, I see a lot of students at home who are shaking their head no, but
What's the expression? You've opened a hornet's nest?
I have.
And as an aside, hornets are very similar to bees. They have a similar purpose. They do not produce honey, and we do not think of them as friends, but they are pollinators. They are important. If you do not have to destroy a hornet's nest because you feel it's dangerous, then you should not.
Okay. Zach, you have your hand up.
I know something about what the harvester bees, I think, do when there's an intruder queen bee.
Okay.
They make a ball around the fake queen bee, and then the heat that the bees prevent kills the queen, but not the real queen bee.
Wow, that's absolutely true, that the bees can protect their own hive from any kind of intruder by surrounding the intruder and generating heat. They vibrate their bodies the same way we do when we're outside in the winter and we start stomping our feet up and down or rubbing our arms against ourselves. The bees produce a heat, and when they get the heat high enough around this intruder, it will cause the intruder to die. Generally, what happens with a queen is a queen will not invade another hive. A yellow jacket might invade the hive, and actually the screen that I showed you on my hive entrances helps my bees prevent other bees from getting in. Oftentimes, though, a hive will, and this is a really tough, you can't make this analogy in human society, but the worker bees in a hive, when they sense that it may be time, they start to produce a new queen, and they may produce several queens. At some point, the queens emerge, and you only can have one queen in the hive. One of the solutions is for the original queen to leave with a bunch of workers and drones and find a new place like that trap that I showed you. The other is that there becomes a struggle and only one queen will survive that struggle.
Okay.
But that was a wonderful piece of information about how the bees are able to counter intruders in their hive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, I think we are out of time, right? We're at 11 o'clock. So I thank you all for getting on this workshop with Mr. Mahony, beekeeper extraordinaire.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you all.
We've been teaching about bees for years and years and years, and I just learned a whole bunch. How about you, Miss Stephanie?
Lots of new facts that I can't wait to share with people.
Yes, yes. So can we all say thank you to Mr. Mahony?
Thank
Thank you.
You're all most welcome.
Thank you.
Had I thought about it previously, Esther, I would have provided close-up views of the bees in their hive rather than bringing a sample into a classroom. Thank goodness for Zoom, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Barry, you've got a question?
Yeah. So my question. I actually learned that drones, bumblebees don't have stingers.
That's true. The bumblebee that you see, and which is perhaps 2 or even 3 times as big as the honeybees, is a bee that lives solitary. It does not go back to a hive. The bumblebee will collect nectar and pollen and make a nest for 1 egg at a time. The bumblebee, all the bumblebees are queens in that they are laying eggs for themselves, but they don't have workers to attend those eggs.
You just blew my mind.
Well, I do have 2 friends that have like a lot of sisters. I have a friend Lacey and a friend Troy, and they have 2 sisters. And one of them, Gianna, she actually knows that they don't have stingers. So I asked her, like, do you know if bumblebees have stingers?
So bumblebees do not sting. Bumblebees do not sting because they don't need to protect a hive, which is the purpose of the stinger, is a defensive weapon to protect their hive.
Mr. Mahoney.
Mr. Mahoney, do you have time to stay on a little bit longer?
I'm at work.
Fantastic. All right, so I'm sorry, who was asking a question?
Gab was.
Okay, go ahead.
Do bumblebees bite?
Well, no, and no bees bite. The danger that bees present is their stinger. And unlike mosquitoes, who, when a mosquito stings, they may inject mosquito saliva into you, and your body swells up because it doesn't want that in your body. The bee has a venom means poison, that is primarily acid. And when it gets into your skin, your body responds and protects itself. Some people, if they got stung by a bee, not only does the bee sting area start to swell, but their whole body could swell up. And it's important to know about yourself how sensitive you are to a bee sting so that you can be protected. You may,
I've never been stung by a bee, so I don't know.
All right. Okay, thank you, Barry. And we still have more hands up. So Ms. Sullivan, do our friends there have a question?
I'm unable to hear and speak at the same time. So we did have a couple of questions about the queen bee. One was, why do the hives need a queen? How long does she live? Will they ever kill her? And what happens if the queen bee dies?
okay, so the queen bee can live 3 to 5 years. In order to live that long, she has to survive each of the winters, which is tough in New England. And the other thing that the queen needs to do is produce enough worker bees to collect the honey and provide the warmth that she needs to survive. If there is an extra queen in the hive, either the original queen, the mother queen, figures this out and leaves. They do a thing called a swarm, and they leave with a bunch of worker bees. Or the queen bees that are in the hive will actually engage in a struggle where one queen bee can sting another and cause that bee to die, that queen to die. Unlike the worker bees, if a queen stings, she does not herself die because the stinger is not ripped from her body. I forget what the other questions were.
Will they ever kill the queen? Will the worker bees ever kill the queen?
Well, no, so no, they will not, but a queen will combat an intruder queen or an extra queen that the workers created.
Right, okay.
And
All right.
the reason for the queen is that the queen is the only bee that lays fertile eggs, which grow into larvae, which then emerge as adult bees.
Okay.
Interestingly, some workers can lay eggs, but those eggs are infertile and they tend to just take up space.
Got it. Okay. All right. We have a question in Mr. Lopez's class.
All right, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah.
How long does an
So our question is, how long does it take to the bees to produce honey?
Well, that's a good question. They're producing the honey right from the start. Some things that I've read say that it takes 10,000 visits to flower to create one little cell full of honey, where the bees are going in and out all day long, and they're putting little tiny drops of nectar into the cell. And over the course of maybe 5 days, that cell worth of nectar matures into becoming honey, and then it gets covered up. And we saw inside the hive some of the honey cells that were covered with the light wax. But there's not a season for making the honey. It's being made constantly.
Okay. That was a great question. Thank you so much for asking. Mrs. LaRose. I think we have 4 more questions and then we are going to wrap it up.
Okay, so one of our questions was, how do you get the bees to stay in your hive boxes?
I put up signs that say, no. It is in the bees' nature. It is their instinct to be with their queen. It is their instinct to go out and get things that their queen needs and bring it back to the queen. And that is what keeps them in the box. If I were to take the bees and the queen out of one of these boxes, put it in another box and put it someplace else, then the bees would quickly learn that that is their new home, and they would be returning to that new home.
All right. And Ms. Hurst? Or the
Yeah, I don't think Mrs. Hurst can talk.
Okay. So we have Mason.
Do you raise anything else besides bees?
Cats? No, my hobby is to raise the bees. My partner's hobby is to raise plants and flowers, and the bees appreciate this greatly. And one of the things we enjoy doing together is sitting and watching the bees visit the plants and think, oh, that's so wonderful. look what these bees are doing. Or that's not one of your bees. I can tell your bees.
Fantastic. All right, and we'll wrap it up with this. Barry, you have one last thing?
Why do bees hide and use their stingers?
I didn't understand.
I think she said, how do bees live without their stingers?
No, why do bees die
Oh,
when they lose?
Why do bees die when they lose their stingers?
Yeah.
Because the stinger is attached to organs on the inside of the bee. And if a bee sticks a stinger in you, there are tiny little barbs on the stinger that make that stinger stay inside you. So when you very abruptly brush the bee away because it hurts, you've actually caused the bee to have that organ yanked out of her body. It sounds kind of rough and nasty, but that's the biology of the bees. They evolved in that manner. Now, generally, an individual bee may live 6 to 9 weeks anyway. When a bee gets old, the bee knows this and will leave the hive, go someplace and die. If a bee dies inside the hive, it becomes a task for some other bees to clean the hive, and they actually will drag this dead bee body. And there have been times when I have a shelf under the entry, and I'll see that the shelf has maybe a dozen dead bees on it. And that's because they were brought out the opening and just dropped.
All right. So I think zombie bees is a good place to stop. And
Thanks.
all right. Mr. Mahony, thank you so much. That was just fantastic. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for asking. Thank you for, you're a wonderfully patient group of kids. I mean, I noticed that several people had their hands up. And of course, it helps that the teacher can turn the microphone on and off. But I appreciate, as a teacher, I appreciate that you were paying attention. So thank you. Have a good summer. Stay away from yellow jackets.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Have a good summer.
Have a good summer. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Question.
Okay, decimos bye.